Imagine a place where shouts never cease, where shadows seem to have their own will, and where those who come in hardly come out the same way. A hospital that should save lives, but has become a portal for something much worse. Hospitals always carry a strange look, don't they? White and silent corridors, where life and death meet every moment. But some hospitals go beyond strangeness. They keep secrets that challenge logic and reason. Today, I will tell the story of a man who was unlucky to step on this cursed place, and it was never the same. Do you have the courage to continue? Carlos always believed that stories of haunted hospitals were just urban legends. He had already spent entire dawn carrying patients between emergency units and never witnessed anything out of the ordinary. But that night, something was different. The ambulance served through the deserted streets when radio chose with an urgent call. A patient needed to be transferred to St. Clair Hospital, an old medical building away from the city, known more for the disappearance rumors than for any excellence care. Carlos's colleague, Julius, exchanged a restless look at him. St. Clair, was this hospital closed? Muttered Julius, adjusting his seatbelts. Carlos frowned. He also had this impression. St. Clair had been inaugurated decades ago, but in recent years, strange news has emerged. Patients who were entering but had no discharge. Doctors who disappear without explanation. Screams echoing through the corridors at dawn. When they arrived, something already seemed wrong. The hospital was an imposing structure with tall and dark windows, as eyes watching in the dimness. The lights of the building flashed intermittently, and the sign at the entrance was spent, with missing letters, as if time wanted to erase its existence. Julius hesitated before opening the doors of the ambulance. "Let's go with that," Carlos said, trying to ignore the bad feeling he climbed through his spine. They pushed. The stretcher inside. The main hall was empty. No receptionist, no nurse, just an oppressive silence. The smell of ether and something rotten hovered in the air. "Hello," he called Julius, his voice echoing in the deserted space. Nothing. Suddenly, an elevator at the end of the corridor opened alone, as if waiting them. A digital sign indicated the third floor. Carlos and Julius exchanged glances, but something seemed to attract them inside. The metal door creaked when it closed, and the elevator began to rise with a bump. As the cabin moved, the lights blinked violently. Then, by a fraction of a second, the reflectors went out completely. In the absolute pitch, a whisper traveled the air. "You shouldn't be here." The elevator trembled, and when the lights came back, Carlos felt his blood freezing. The reflection in the elevator mirror showed something more. A tall and misshapen silhouette behind them, even if the space was empty. The door opened with a metallic sound, revealing a dark and infinite corridor. Carlos felt a knot in his stomach by taking the first step out of the elevator. The corridor before them was suffocating. The walls were peeled, covered with dirty brands, as if someone had tried to escape. The air smelled of mold and iron, a thick metallic smell. "It's not right," Julius murmured, his voice shaking. The stretcher ranges as they advanced, the wheels echoing in the oppressive silence. The hospital looked different from any other Carlos had already stepped on. The space looked like bigger. The corridor extended far beyond the structure of the building should allow it. It was as if that floor did not belong to the real world. Suddenly, steps, not theirs. They were dragged, heavy. Something or someone moved somewhere ahead. The hallway lamps began to blink uncontrollably, throwing shadows that danced on the walls. Julius held Carlos's arm, squeezing hard. "There's someone there." Carlos did not want to look. He instinctively knew that something was waiting for them in the darkness, but they had no choice. The patient on the stretcher breathed irregularly, as if he felt the evil presence in the air. With each step, the sound became higher. The corridor became narrower. The doors beside them were ajar, revealing empty rooms with messy beds and rusty medical equipment. And then, right ahead, they saw a tall figure wearing a filthy medical apron stopped at the end of the corridor. The face was a distorted spot with no definite features, as if it were a materialized shadow. Carlos felt his chest squeeze. The instinct shouted to run, but his legs looked like lead. The being tilted his head strangely and stepped forward. Who are you?" shouted Julius, his voice failing. The answer came in a gurgling sound, a mixture of moan and laughter. The figure began to move, but not walking. She slid down the floor as if she didn't need her legs to get around. The radio in Carlos' shoe belt violently. "Don't look at him." Carlos and Julius froze. The radio static was sharp, but the message was clear. They could not face that. Carlos squeezed his eyes, trying to move away without looking straight at the creature. But Julius looked, and then he started screaming, an indescribable sound of absolute pain and terror. Her body turned back unnaturally, the veins jumping out of her neck. Carlos tried to hold him, but something invisible tore him out of his hands. Julius was thrown against the wall like a cloth doll, his head beating with a dry crack. Carlos swallowed the scream. He could not react. "I couldn't look. I just had to leave." The corridor began to tremble, as if shattering. The floor cracked under his feet. The whole hospital vibrated with a distorted sound, like a lament coming from the bowels of the construction itself. Without thinking twice, Carlos grabbed the stretcher and ran. He didn't know if he was going in the right direction. The hospital seemed to be bending over itself, the walls moving place. But he kept running, hearing the echo of his own steps mingling with the endless screams that came from all sides. And then he saw the exit. The elevator door was ahead, open, shining like a lighthouse in the darkness. But something was wrong. The elevator looked old, rusty, as if it were there for decades without being used. Carlos had no choice. He pushed the stretcher inside and pressed all the buttons. The doors closed with a crash, and the elevator began to go down. But before the doors closed completely, he saw the reflection in the elevator mirror. Julius was there, stopped behind him, but he had no eyes. The elevator descended at an irregular pace, ranging like collapsing at any time. Carlos felt his heart hammering in his chest, the sweat dripping over his face. He didn't dare look at the mirror again. Julius's reflection was there, and Carlos knew this was not his friend. The smell of iron in the air intensified. The lights flashed, and between flash and another, the reflected figure approached slowly. Carlos squeezed his eyes tightly, holding his stretcher as if it could protect him. Then the elevator stopped. The panel showed the ground floor, but the doors did not open. The silence inside the cabin was suffocating. Carlos felt the presence behind him, so close that he could hear an irregular and sibilant breathing on his neck. "I won't look, I won't look." The seconds dragged on as an eternity, and then a low, grotesque voice whispered in his ear, "Do you think you got out?" Carlos did not resist. "Your instinct won." He opened his eyes and turned. Julius's reflection was there, but now he was inside the cabin. The elevator collapsed. Carlos felt his body be pulled down with an absurd force. The walls vibrated, and a deafening tinnitus filled his ears, the metal writhing around him. And, in the middle of chaos, he saw images flashing before his eyes. Endless corridors, shadows dragging faceless, patients, doctors with old masks watching through dirty glass windows. And then, everything stopped. The expected impact never came. Carlos woke up in the ambulance driver's seat. The fingers spiked the wheel. His chest climbed and descended uncontrollably. Radio was squeaking softly by its side. He looked to the side. The passenger seat was empty. Julius was not there. Carlos left the vehicle in despair, looking around. The night was quiet. St. Clair Hospital was no longer there. In the place where he should be, there was only a wasteland, taken by the high bush. No sign of the building, no plate, nothing. His whole body trembled. He pulled the radio and shouted, "Central, here is Carlos. For God's sake, someone answers me." The radio snapped, followed by a long squeak, and then a familiar voice answered, "Carlos, where are you?" It was Julius. Carlos felt the blood freezing. His wide eyes stared at the empty horizon. The voice on the radio became more distorted, like a distant echo. "From another world, you left me here. Carlos, why did you leave me here?" The radio fell silent. Carlos dropped the device on the floor and retreated, feeling the air missing his lungs. He knew he could never explain what happened. And I also knew that, no matter where it was, St. Clair would never let him go. Hospitals are places where lives are saved, but also where many lives are lost. Some say that certain places absorb the suffering of those who passed there, becoming arrests for restless souls. St. Clair Hospital may have disappeared, but does it really cease to exist? Or are you just waiting for your next victim? And you, have you ever felt something strange upon entering a hospital? Any invisible presence, an inexplicable chill, or even heard voices when it should be alone? If you have gone through something like this, share your experience in the comments. I would love to read your story, and maybe it appears in an upcoming video. If you liked this dark account, be sure to leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to receive more terrifying stories like this. And if you want to feel even more goosebumps, check out the other recommended videos here on the screen. We see each other in the next video. If you survive there,